They said the money would change everything. Billions announced, headlines everywhere, promises repeated so often they started to sound like truth. But years later, nothing around them looked different. Same streets, same fear, same quiet struggle. Somehow, the wealth existed, just never where it was supposed to land. What no one noticed at first was the quiet person standing in the middle of it all, someone who touched that money, redirected it, and carried the weight of those promises alone. And the closer people came to the truth, the more uncomfortable one question became. What if the real cost of having too much was paid by someone you never see? Morning arrived the same way it always did. The sun crept over the low rooftops, lighting up cracked sidewalks, faded storefront signs, and the thin line of cars already waiting at the intersection. A bakery opened its metal shutters with a tired rattle. The smell of bread drifted briefly through the air before being swallowed by traffic and routine. People stepped out of their homes with coffee cups, backpacks, and expressions shaped by repetition. This was a place built on habits. The same bus arrived late every morning. The same cashier worked the corner store, counting coins carefully before sliding them back across the counter. The same complaints were exchanged in low voices, about rent, about bills, about how nothing ever really seemed to change. Life here wasn't dramatic. It was steady, restrained, and quietly heavy. Children walked to school in small groups, laughing too loudly, as if sound itself could protect them. Their shoes were worn, their backpacks patched, but they moved with the confidence of those who hadn't learned yet how narrow the future could feel. Parents watched from doorways until they disappeared down the block, then turned back inside to prepare for long shifts and short paychecks. Posters still hung on a few walls, sun-bleached now, corners peeling. They showed smiling faces, bold numbers, words like investment, renewal, opportunity. Most people passed them without looking. They had learned that reading promises too closely only made the disappointment sharper later. Hope, around here, was something you rationed. By midday, the town settled into its familiar rhythm. Shops opened, some half-empty. Construction sites sat frozen, fences rusting around projects that never moved forward. At lunch counters and break rooms, conversations circled the same questions. Asterisk, did you hear anything new? Did anything ever come of it? Asterisk, the answers were always vague, unfinished, quickly replaced by jokes or silence. In the afternoon, an elderly man watered a small garden in front of his building, even though everyone knew the soil was poor. A woman counted tips twice before folding them into her pocket. Somewhere, a radio played a news update about markets rising and profits soaring, but no one turned up the volume. Those numbers felt like they belonged to another country, another life. As evening approached, the streets filled again. Tired faces, slow steps, grocery bags light enough to carry with one hand. Lights flickered on behind curtains. Dinner smells mixed, rice, soup, something fried, simple meals stretched as far as they could go. From the outside, everything looked calm, normal, almost peaceful. And yet, beneath that calm was a quiet awareness everyone shared but rarely spoke aloud. Somewhere there was more. More money. More resources. More than anyone here could ever spend in a lifetime. It existed, undeniably. You could feel it in the distance, like a storm that never arrived. The town didn't look angry about it. Just patient. Waiting. As if, at any moment, something promised long ago might finally remember where it was supposed to go. No one remembered exactly when they first noticed him. He was always there, but never in a way that demanded attention. Sitting on the same bench near the bus stop. Standing quietly at the edge of meetings no one officially invited him to. Walking through the market with slow, deliberate steps, as if he were measuring something invisible in the air. People saw him every day, yet somehow felt as if they were seeing him for the first time. He spoke softly, when he spoke at all. His words were simple, almost careful, as if language itself could betray something he was trying to protect. When asked where he came from, he smiled politely and changed the subject. When asked what he did for a living, he answered with vague phrases that sounded true but explained nothing. Still, there was something about him that didn't fit the rhythm of the town. He never complained about money. Never rushed. Never looked anxious when bills were discussed or prices went up. While others calculated every purchase, he paid without hesitation, then walked away as if the numbers meant nothing. Some people noticed that detail and felt uneasy, though they couldn't explain why. Children liked him instantly. He listened when they spoke, really listened, kneeling to their height as if their stories mattered more than his own. Elderly neighbors trusted him with errands. Shop owners felt strangely relieved when he entered their stores, even when he bought almost nothing. But it was the moments when he thought no one was watching that raised the most questions. Sometimes, he stood in front of abandoned construction sites for long minutes, staring at unfinished walls. Sometimes, he stopped beneath faded posters about promised investments and touched them gently, like someone touching a wound that never healed. And sometimes, late in the evening, when the streets were almost empty, he looked up at the city lights in the distance, not with envy, but with something closer to regret. People began to whisper about him, not because he was dangerous, but because he seemed to know something they didn't. The first real question didn't come from a rumor. It came from a receipt. A young shop owner noticed it while closing for the night. The register balanced perfectly, even though one transaction was missing. No cash shortage. No card error. Just a quiet gap where a payment should have been. At first, she blamed herself. Fatigue did that. Long days blurred numbers. Then it happened again. Different store. Same absence. Always small amounts. Always clean. Always after he had been there. No one accused him. Not openly. There was no anger in the discovery, only confusion. The kind that settles in your chest and refuses to leave. People compared notes in half-finished sentences, lowering their voices even when alone. Each story sounded incomplete by itself. Together, they felt intentional. Someone remembered how the community center's electricity bill had been paid anonymously. Another recalled a hospital invoice that vanished before the due date. A teacher mentioned supplies arriving with no sender listed, no explanation given. Every trail ended the same way, silence. When asked directly, he never denied anything. He simply listened. Sometimes he nodded. Sometimes he smiled faintly, as if recognizing a truth he had already accepted. When pressed for answers, he said things like, "It's easier this way," or, "Not everything needs a name." Then he changed the subject. The more people noticed, the more uncomfortable the pattern became. He wasn't giving money the way donors did. There were no announcements. No gratitude expected. No sense of generosity. It felt more like correction, like someone quietly moving pieces back where they believed they belonged. One evening, a local council member spotted him near the municipal building, standing beneath a plaque listing funding amounts that never reached the town. The man traced the engraved numbers with his finger, slow and deliberate, before stepping back into the shadows. That night, a single document appeared in a public inbox. No sender. No signature. Just a scanned page from years ago, an internal report mentioning redirected funds, sealed accounts, and a clause that transferred responsibility to one unnamed individual. It ended with a line no one could stop thinking about, asterisk, all excess will be handled privately. Asterisk, and for the first time, the town realized this wasn't charity. It was containment. After that document surfaced, the town changed in small, uneasy ways. People began watching more closely, not just him, but everything. Budget meetings felt heavier. Conversations stalled when certain names were mentioned. The air carried a new tension, as if everyone had stepped onto unstable ground without realizing it. More details started to surface, uninvited. A stalled housing project suddenly received materials overnight, just enough to keep it from collapsing, but not enough to finish. A food program that was supposed to shut down found its freezer mysteriously restocked. Medical debts were reduced, never erased, as if someone were carefully adjusting the balance rather than fixing the problem entirely. And always, the pattern was the same. No visibility, no credit, no permanence. People tried to thank him. He refused gently, almost urgently. When someone once said, "You're doing what they never did," his expression changed, not to pride, but to something closer to alarm. He asked them not to say that again. Then came the moments that felt wrong. Late at night, lights appeared in buildings that had been closed for years. Security cameras recorded him entering offices no one believed he had access to. Files were opened, reviewed, then locked again. Nothing was stolen. Nothing damaged. Just checked. A former accountant, now retired, recognized his posture on one grainy recording and felt a chill run through her. She remembered boardrooms filled with confident voices, presentations about surplus, growth, and excess. She remembered a quiet clause buried deep in contracts, one no one ever discussed. The behavior grew more intense, more deliberate. He began visiting places outside the town. Banks, archives, storage facilities with no signs. Each trip was followed by something shifting back home, rent lowered temporarily, a fee waived, a service quietly restored. Always temporary. Always controlled. People didn't know whether to feel relieved or afraid. The most unsettling part wasn't what he was doing. It was how exhausted he looked while doing it. His steps slowed. His shoulders carried more weight. Once, a child asked him why he never smiled anymore. He paused too long before answering, then said softly, "Because I'm almost out of time." No one knew what that meant. No one asked him to explain. But the town could feel it now. Whatever he was holding back, whatever he was managing alone, was growing heavier. And if he let go, even for a moment, the excess that never reached the people might finally come crashing down on them instead. The past didn't return all at once. It leaked. A journalist from the city arrived with a camera she never turned on. She had followed the paper trail as far as it would let her, and what she found unsettled her more than corruption ever had. The money hadn't vanished. It had been contained, locked inside structures designed to grow endlessly, far from the people it was meant to serve. Years ago, during a closed-door summit, projections had shown a future of surplus so large it became dangerous. Too much capital, moving too fast, destabilizing housing, prices, lives. The solution wasn't redistribution. It was isolation. That's where he came in. He hadn't been chosen for his ambition or his influence, but for his restraint. He was quiet in meetings, rarely spoke unless asked, and when he did, he focused on consequences others dismissed as theoretical. He volunteered for a role no one wanted, sole custodian of the excess. No oversight committee. No public record. Just responsibility. The agreement was simple and cruel. Keep the surplus from flooding the system, redirect small amounts when collapse was imminent, and never let the source be seen. If people believed the money existed, they would demand it. If they demanded it, the balance would break. So he learned to ration hope. The journalist found his name buried under amendments and annexes, erased from summaries, replaced by phrases like private handler and independent buffer. She understood then why there were no arrests, no scandals, no villains to point at. Everyone involved had moved on. Only he had stayed. When she confronted him, he didn't argue. He didn't justify himself. He just asked one question: "Have you ever watched too much water destroy a house?" She had no answer. He looked older now, thinner than the man in the documents. "Excess doesn't save people," he said quietly. "It drowns them." Slowly. The journalist left without publishing a word. And the town, unaware of her decision, slept that night believing nothing from the past could still reach them, never knowing how close the flood had already come. The breaking point arrived without noise. It began with a notice posted quietly on a government website. No press conference, no warning. A scheduled release. Long sealed accounts were set to be normalized, their contents redistributed back into the open financial system. The language was technical, harmless-looking. But he saw it immediately. For the first time, he didn't sit on the bench that morning. He moved fast, faster than anyone had ever seen him move. Calls were made that hadn't been made in years. Doors that were never meant to open were unlocked again. The systems he had held together through patience and restraint began to strain under pressure he could no longer absorb alone. People noticed the change in him before they understood the reason. He skipped meals. His hands trembled slightly when he signed documents. When asked if something was wrong, he simply said, "They're done pretending it's dangerous." That night, power flickered across the town. Just once. Enough to unsettle. Enough to remind people how fragile their normality really was. In the distance, construction cranes lit up again, idle but awake, like something stirring from sleep. The journalist called him. She had seen the notice too. She asked if this was what he had been preparing for all along. He didn't answer right away. "I was never meant to stop it forever," he said finally. only long enough for people to forget how much there was. The truth pressed closer now. If the excess returned all at once, prices would spike, rents would explode, speculation would replace stability overnight. The town wouldn't be saved. It would be consumed. At dawn, he stood beneath the oldest poster still clinging to a brick wall, the one promising renewal in bold letters that had almost faded away. He removed it carefully, folding it instead of tearing it down. By morning, he was gone. No note. No explanation. Just a single encrypted transfer logged across multiple systems. Everything he had been holding, rerouted into one irreversible path. And as the town woke up, unaware, the question no one knew to ask hung in the air. What happens when the person holding back the flood decides to let it go? The release didn't come as an explosion. It came as silence. Markets didn't spike. Rents didn't soar. There was no sudden wave of wealth crashing into the streets. Instead, the systems paused, just long enough for something invisible to take effect. The irreversible path he had chosen wasn't distribution. It was dissolution. The excess never reached the people because it was never meant to. The funds were broken apart, dissolved into long-term obligations, debt offsets, and slow-moving public structures designed to absorb rather than amplify. Endowments locked for decades. Housing trusts that couldn't be sold or speculated on. Infrastructure accounts that released value only in maintenance, not profit. The money didn't disappear. It was rendered harmless. He had rewritten the ending. What the town had felt for years, the missing change, the stalled promises, had been the cost of preventing something worse. Too much money, moving too fast, would have turned homes into assets, neighbors into competitors, survival into a market. The people wouldn't have gained stability. They would have lost each other. This was why he never allowed visibility. Why he never fixed everything. Why relief always arrived just before collapse and never more. He wasn't failing to deliver change. He was controlling the damage. In the final records, his role appeared only once, stripped of name and history. A single line buried deep in the closure documents. Asterisk, buffer fully expended. Asterisk, the journalist found it weeks later. She understood then why he had looked at the city lights with regret. Why he had seemed exhausted by numbers no one else could see. He hadn't been protecting the money from the people. He had been protecting the people from the money. And in doing so, he erased himself completely, choosing a future where no one would ever know how close they had come to drowning in abundance. The town felt no celebration. No relief. Only a strange calm. As if something heavy had finally been set down. In the months that followed, nothing remarkable happened, and that was the miracle. The town didn't become rich. It didn't transform overnight. There were no headlines, no grand reopenings, no sudden rush of opportunity. Rent stayed predictable. Small shops survived another year. Children kept walking to school on the same cracked sidewalks, their laughter unchanged. Life continued, steady and imperfect. People slowly stopped waiting for a moment of arrival. The abandoned construction sites were repurposed, not finished, turned into gardens, storage, shared spaces. The posters promising renewal disappeared, replaced by handwritten notices and quiet agreements. Progress no longer announced itself. It showed up in maintenance, in repair, in things that lasted because no one was trying to extract more from them. Occasionally, someone mentioned him. Not with certainty. With hesitation. As if speaking too clearly might undo whatever balance had been restored. No statue was built. No street renamed. His absence became part of the town's shape, like a missing brick that somehow made the wall stronger. The journalist never published the story. She kept the documents locked away, understanding now that exposure wasn't always justice. Sometimes it was erosion. She wrote instead about restraint. About systems that failed not from lack, but from excess. Years later, a child asked a teacher why the town never got rich when others did. The teacher thought for a moment, then said, because having enough turned out to be safer than having everything. That idea lingered. Somewhere far away, wealth continued to grow, chase itself, promise change it would never deliver. But here, people learned something quieter, harder to explain. That progress doesn't always arrive as more. Sometimes it arrives as less damage, less noise, less loss. And the greatest act of care is not giving people everything they're told they deserve, but standing silently between them and what would destroy them if it ever arrived all at once.